Hello and welcome, it's me, Marls44, and welcome to this Vanguard Zero Brilliant Strike tier list, set 15's tier list, and boy oh boy do we got a lot of decks here. My first tier list, I did try to record one yesterday actually, and unfortunately this is going to be, the day before the set comes out that this is uploaded, because the recording just didn't work out. It was an hour long, and yeah, so I just placed everything, and I'm just gonna talk about the placings. I'm not gonna go like super duper in depth, but I will talk about everything. Of course, I'm gonna do the previous tier list that I've been wanting to do, because I want to take a look back at all that as well. But it'll be nice to kind of do that. Also, I know the tiers have passed, but I want to do it, and the Break Ride's an important era for me. It's where the game really intrigued me, and I want to cover that at least. But anyways, we're jumping on our first one here, and boy oh boy, we got a lot of decks now. As you can see, I have some decks at the bottom that you could possibly place in a bottom tier or lower in some meme tier or some shit. But really, I just kind of wasn't sure if I would add them in. They're decks that just don't keep up anymore, and I'm sure there are others too that I can't think of at the moment, but they're decks that just don't keep up anymore, but they could still be considered to be put in the bottom tier just because, I'm sure there are people who just enjoy playing those decks, and they're not total dumpster trash, even though they're pretty bad that they don't even deserve to be in the list. Yeah, talking about pretty bad, we're going from the bottom to the top. So we got our bottom tier, our low tier, our mid tier, our high tier, and our top tier decks. Yeah, let's just start off, cover this. So I'm just gonna briefly explain bottom tier, because bottom tier has the same issues. They do the simple minimal amount for the clan at this point, because all the other decks, in this tier list, do things better, for their, respective clan. The bottom tier decks just kind of do the simplest thing, and they just don't have much, if anything, going for them now, with all these decks and everything that they can do, and they just can't keep up. None of these bottom tier decks can keep up. Thankfully, I'm very happy about this, Bermuda is going to be getting support next set, and I love Bermuda, and I've been sad ever since, Bermuda came out when it sucked, and it kind of got a little good when Break Ride first came out, when its Break Ride first came out, but then it kind of just fell down within a couple sets, 2-3 sets, and yeah, it found its way back down here again. But I'm very excited, though. I'm very, very excited to get the good Bermuda stuff. We're talking Bermuda jumps to high tier or top tier. Around there. We're talking there. So, very excited to see that. I cannot wait. But yeah, that's pretty much the bottom tier. They just do the simplest thing, and they can barely do anything. They struggle to do really anything. So on to the low tier. It generally has similar issues. They could do a few things like Tyranno Legend, Magus, Vowing Saber reverse with the crits, Ezel with kind of destroying a bunch of your opponent's rear guards thanks to the Break Ride and all that, Tempest Vault with the retiring and everything, and you can get some cards back thanks to destroying other Tempest Vaults. But you clean out both players' boards, which is extremely risky, and Remiel Reverse, which just takes too long to kind of get going. So with low tier, it's kind of just that issue of they have things, it's not much, but they have things, and they still don't keep up well. Mid tier is where it starts getting better, but low tier is kind of just, they still have things, but they just don't keep up well. I've considered actually moving Neo Nectar and Battle Sister into low tier, because I'm kind of on the edge with that one. But I think for this set they'll stay in mid tier for me, but then the next one they'll probably go to low tier. But yeah, So for low tier, it's kind of just, as I said, same thing as bottom tier, just they have a few more things, but it doesn't amount to everything else that, you know, mid tier above have. It just not nearly as good. So easy to cover the two bottom ones, but we are going to go into a little more detail for these next three because, well, they deserve a bit more detail, especially because there are a lot more decks in the next two areas that I put in mid and high. So for like the mid tier, we'll start off at the bottom. We got Battle Sisters, Neo Nectars, Seal Dragon, Hayaki Vogue Reverse, Dayusha Reverse, Immortal Asura, which got a big nerf, Fortuna, Ammon Reverse, Ethics Extreme. I'm gonna stop there for now because I want to talk about like all of those. Because the thing is with those decks, from Ethics Extreme down, maybe not Ethics Extreme, maybe Fortuna down, maybe Hayaki Vogue down, maybe Reverse Dayusha down, somewhere around there. I could put them in between low and mid tier. Like I wouldn't exactly put they don't deserve to be in low tier in my opinion, but they don't deserve to be in mid tier. It's kind of like a middle ground. But this is how I do it, so it's kind of like I don't want to make some kind of in between tier that just makes no sense. And I would consider them a little more mid tier just because of what they can do. It's just lower half of mid tier, you know, just because of what they can do. And what they struggle with. But Seal Dragons, Kagero, I mean, they retire a lot still. They're all good. Like Battle Sister has its stands and draws, like 9 stand in the draws. Dayusha Reverse can kind of retire your rear guard at least. Hayaki Vogue, you can do some power-ups and, you know, get restands with stand triggers. Immortal Asura, you can still use Ethics. It's not nearly as good, though. It's not busted beyond belief because of the nerf that it got when coming into it, because they just butchered it before it could even pop off on English, thankfully, on global. Fortuna has been falling down because it relies a lot on RNG. Ammon Reverse is just a weaker Reiji. It's good, but it's just a weaker Reiji. Reiji is just so much more superior. And Ethics Extreme, sorry, not Ethics Extreme, Ethics Reverse, its restanding is really good when you get the break ride, but it's okay when you don't. And it's kind of that issue. But even with the break ride, it kind of makes it difficult if your opponent pops like a trigger early on or something, or just sometimes if your opponent pops a trigger and you can't get your units to power up, it kind of has a bit of a struggle with that, because then the Ethics break ride doesn't do as much as you want it to. So that's kind of like the lower half of mid in my opinion. I'd say like Glory up is the higher part of mid tier. But yeah, as I said, like you could probably like rearrange this a little yourself for that. But yeah, I actually made the template if anybody wants to use it. I made it. I don't know. I just called it like set 15 Vanguard 0 tier list. If anybody wants to use it, but make their own. But of course you might have some decks you wanted to add, and so of course at that point I just say make your own. But yeah, I thought I'd throw that out there. Anyways, let's look a little more into decks now, because we got like Glory and stuff. So Glory has been falling off, of course. Like at the beginning of Break Ride, it was at the top, but it's kind of been falling off. Include like the normal Glory Maelstrom deck. That's what that is. But it's also like Tetra Glory. It's both Glories because both are, I'd say, about the same. Yeah, it's just been falling off. And I think it's just going to keep falling down more and more because it just can't keep up, and it doesn't have the tools to keep up. Like, it just, it was higher than MLB before for me. Like when Jewel Knights came out, I think I still had it top tier because it was still very high up, but now it's kind of fallen below MLB because there's just so many decks that do it better, and it just struggles to be able to get those wins, and now MLB is like higher than it. So things like that can go back and forth, right? And then we got the two Great Nature clans decks. the Polaris and Leopold Reverse, which are both really good. With the Break Ride, it's pretty terrifying too, and all the power-ups and the extra swings, they're really good, but they're a bit of a risk too. A risk for a reward, double-edged sword basically, and yeah, they're kind of just here because they don't match up to like high tier decks. Like high tier is kind of insane. High tier is where decks start to get kind of nuts, and they're not there. They're still really good. They're fun to play, and you could definitely, you put the work into it, and you could do very well with Great Nature. And same thing with Angel Feather. Like Angel Feather, the Zerekiel one, not the Ramiel Reverse. The Zerekiel deck is very good because you put that effort into it, and you can get very good progress off of it, very good rewards off of it, because you will be rewarded for pushing the deck, because it has the power, the capability to do so. It's not at that high tier level. I don't think it'll ever be at that high tier level unless it gets like more support, but it's still a very good deck and very fun to play with the multiple swings and everything. MLB, just a classic. It's hard to kind of bump it down too far because it has that crit, it has the Gancelot, it has the Blaster Blade. It's so hard to like push it down to low tier because it's still a good deck. It's still solid. Like it was high tier for the longest time for me. But I'd say, yeah, it's about time it moved to mid tier because just the high tier decks are just so much better than it now. And same thing with Spike Brothers, like same exact thing as I said with MLB and Maelstrom in a way too, because it was high tier, it was top tier for the longest time for me, and then it kind of just bumped down to high tier because it just started struggling. Bad End Dragger is really good for it, but it just started struggling, and unfortunately, like, it just moved down, and I don't think it'll ever be bad. Spikes is pretty terrifying, and eventually Spikes will probably bump back up there because they can just bum rush you like crazy, and that is pretty gross and broken, as you'll see for some other decks in this list. The bum rushing can be kind of insane sometimes, and that was like Immortal Sure's problem, was the bum rushing. So I definitely expect Spikes to go back up eventually when they get more support, but for now they're about mid tier, because high mid tier, because yeah, but they're still really, really good. And then we got Mangetsu Storm, I think that's how you say it. Better than Hyoki Vogue Reverse. Mangetsu Storm can do some sick things with like restanding and extra attacks and other stuff. It can kind of surprise you. It's a pretty good deck, but of course it does struggle in some aspects, but it's still pretty good, and you'll get rewarded for it. Everything in like this higher portion of mid tier, you'll get rewarded for them, but they just don't keep up with like the high tier, top tier decks. This high portion of mid tier that I was talking about when I said separate like Ethics Extreme downward. So I'm talking about like Glory and up. And then we also have the Great Daiusha Kaiser build in mid tier, the king of mid tier, I'd say, because it's pretty nasty. Swinging with that 3 crit a few times is kind of gross. You get like the 3 crit swing a couple times, and you can deny your opponent limit break. And it's in mid tier because like it's same thing with everything else. It's not as good as the high tier decks. It will struggle in some areas, and unfortunately, like that 3 crit isn't going to make the biggest difference, as you can see from like stuff like Vowing Saber, where you can do 3 crit as well. It's not going to make the biggest difference, but it is good at pressuring because of Kaiser's Break Ride skill, and that's part of where it comes in handy a lot, is the Kaiser. It's because of Kaiser that Great Daiusha is really high up, because of Kaiser's skill. It's with that, like, oh, you gotta drop 2 PGs if I check a grade 3. Haha! And you're coming with 3 crit? Oh, and you're gonna be swinging with 3 crit probably next turn too. Oh boy, so I basically need like 3 PGs to be safe. Oh jeez. Of course, that's if you get a grade 3, but still, it's pretty scary in that aspect. Alright, so moving on to high tier, we got your normal Link Joker deck. So, like Nebula Lord or Swords Child, whichever one. They're basically about the same. They're pretty much the same. I don't think either... Like, I don't think one's better than the other. I think they're basically the same thing. They've fallen down, of course, because, well, Chaos Breaker is just so good, and there's so many decks that can kind of deal with it now, and still get those, like, extra attacks, as you can see from almost everything above it. And, yeah, it's just a really good deck, still. Link Joker is still scary. I expect this to fall down further, like, later on, like, within a few sets or something, but Link Joker is still going to be Link Joker, and still going to be kind of scary. They don't do what Chaos Breaker does. I mean, sure, like, the new support is helpful for Link Joker, but, like, it doesn't suffice to too much for them, unfortunately, and they still kind of just, they're still good. They're still really good. You will get rewarded for playing them, because Link Joker is, like, just gross, and, you know, newbies will have trouble against Link Joker, or people who don't know how to deal with Link Joker will have too much trouble, and they will lose. But, yeah. This deck isn't where it used to be, because, well, there's just so many better decks now. Then we have Tsukiyomi, classic. Like, I'd never expect to remove this from high tier. It's not a top tier deck in my opinion, but it's not a mid tier deck, and I don't think I think it's always going to be a high tier deck. The biggest reason is because of the information. The information is huge for Tsukiyomi. It's that information, and they always show up at tournaments because of it. They're always showing up at tournaments because of that information, and it's just disgusting. The information is huge in Vanguard, and knowing what's going to come, of course, they can be screwed over sometimes by, like, okay, can't really do much about this, I guess I'm kind of screwed here, but most of the time they're pretty good, pretty clean, and yeah, it deserves to stay and be in a high tier. Reiji got the nerfs, but definitely still up there a lot, because that crit, that pressure, all that shit he can do is just insane. Denying your opponent, like, limit break, everything, or just pushing them to the edge, either or. Because I will say, I'm not 100% sure sometimes about how the PG works. Sometimes it's popping when you're at 3 damage, and sometimes it doesn't pop when you're at 3 damage, and it pops when you're at 4. I don't quite understand, to be honest. And I'm talking about with 2 damage coming your way, with, like, Reiji crit, basically. I don't understand completely. If somebody could clarify that for me, I would love to know. It's just a little confusing, because I've noticed that trend. And it would help me to understand the game a little better, not just that, help others understand. And this is probably the perfect video to do that, so that's why I asked right now. And then it would also, you know, I might end up changing something knowing that information, but I doubt it. With all the times it's happened, more often than not, it doesn't pop at 3 damage. So with that information, that's how I went about with the tier list. But there are times it pops at 3, and your opponent's swinging with 2 crit, not 3. Like, it's not great Dayusha crit, it's just normal, like, MLB crit, and it pops, and it's like, what? Yeah, I'm not sure. But hopefully somebody can clarify that for us. Just so, not just me, but I'm sure a lot of people don't really know why that happens. It might be a bug. Don't know. Anyways, next up, Tetra. Tetra Aqua Force gross deck. It's so consistent, and the restanding, the plussing, you need your pieces, of course, and that's kind of why it's in high tier. And it can still get screwed over by other decks, you know, because you're not, like, drawing your cards and other shit. So, remains in high tier for that reason, but it's still a very, very good solid deck. I think anything in high tier you can do extremely well with, pretty much. Mid tier, like the upper half of mid tier, is going to be like, you have to work really hard, but you can do very well with. And top tier, you just kind of slap people. You just slap them in the ass. Give them a good slap in the ass. Football players, whatever, basketball players, something. I forgot. I think it's football players. But anyways, enough of that. Dauntless reverse. By the way, with Tetra, restanding Vanguard, always stupid strong. So, yeah, that's why even like I don't expect something like Ethics Extreme even to like drop down too far, because restanding Vanguards are just always gross. But of course you need that consistency to it. Something like Tetra, yeah, I don't expect him falling very far ever. Yeah. Dauntless Reverse, surprisingly extremely strong. With the fact that you can have it swing with Dauntless and like break right onto Dauntless, and you'll be able to swing with an extra crit twice, thanks to a grade 1, since you don't use many counterblasts, and then you can, you know, right into Novel Vague later, and he retires a bunch of stuff, and just the pressure of like all the retiring, you can basically retire your entire that rhymes, your opponent's back row, all the grade 1s, they're gone. And yeah, it helps out to get you into that advantage state, and on top of the fact that you get to draw cards out of this shit and just cycle through the deck quite a bit, and it's just Kagero is just gross. But Dauntless Reverse, surprisingly very strong. Ezel Scissors, one of the only decks that can really hard counter Link Joker. Ezel Scissors is gross as shit, and you have the pseudo build, you have the normal Ezel build. They're both very, very strong, very good in their own right, and yeah, they're just a really strong deck. Galaxy Blaukluger, very powerful as well, with the restanding, with the whole field restanding because of Monplow Kluger, and just all the cards you can get thanks to your starter as well. Be able to like get those into hand, get your PGs, other stuff. Ezel Scissors, by the way, same thing with like the cycling of the deck to make sure you can get your triggers and draw into PGs more often. Like, they're just really good decks. Of course, they're not top tier because like there are some things like holding them back, and it's more so a bit of RNG, but it's also a bit of just the deck isn't quite there yet. Sanctuary of Light, I believe it's called. I don't 100% remember. I think it's Sanctuary of Light. But yeah, surprisingly a very good deck. You basically like superior call cards every turn. You get to thin out your deck so much, get into your PGs easier, get your triggers easier. It's actually a very good deck, and people were kind of surprised by it, but glad to see it here, honestly. Glad to see like some kind of obscure deck just kind of pop off like that. It makes me happy to see something like that. And then we have Lukia Reverse. So for a while I thought this was top tier. Honestly, there are a few decks at the top of high tier that I did think were top tier, and I kind of changed my mind when making this because I looked at everything and thought more into it, put a bit more thought into it, and I'm going to talk a little about that. But Lukia Reverse, you can do so much with your pressure and everything. You can get so many attacks off. Link Joker's in big issues. Sure, Link Joker can stop a front row, but it can still get 3 attacks off. And Lukia Reverse can just do so much with the selective soul charging, and it's such a strong deck. The only thing is, it is held back a little bit, unfortunately, just like a bit. I'd say, honestly, most of the high tier decks are kind of just held back a little that don't make them top tier. Pretty much. That's pretty much what's going on with that. And Lukia Reverse is in that same situation. Partially with what you have to soul charge, but usually that's not a huge issue. It's just you're able to put out all that pressure, and you can get your opponent to like 4 damage when they're on grade 2 sometimes, but it's just not like, it's not strong enough to compete with the top tier decks. It's just off by a bit. It needs a little more. It needs a little more support. You can do all the spear calling, get all the attacks, do everything, but it needs a bit more support. Otherwise, honestly, it would be a top tier deck in my opinion. But for a while, I viewed it as a top tier deck, and then I'm like, nah. Honestly, at this point, I think it's high tier. Because, yeah. And I mean, unfortunately, the same thing with Minerva. Similar thing. I thought Minerva was a top tier deck in this set, and then it kind of just fell down a bit for me. It's pretty close. I'd say I'd argue, honestly, everything from Lukia Reverse and up, these like top 4 could still be top tier. like, nothing's for certain. Like, I could switch Ezel Scissors with, like, Dauntless Reverse, or... probably not Dauntless Reverse, but probably, like, Galaxy Blau, and I think these two could kind of switch, you know? It kind of, like, Tetra and Dauntless Reverse, they could kind of switch places. Like, not everything's set in stone, nothing's set in stone, but it's kind of, like, Mangetsu Storm, I think, could, like, switch with Spike and MOB, maybe, too. It's not all certain, but... It's kind of just where I'm placing it, like, on my opinion, of course. But Minerva, restanding Vanguard, really good. She has a lot of good points to her with Chamomile and everything, and retiring, and the getting soul back, and you get pluses for your break ride. And you can also, you know, the soul back as well is good from oranges and grappa. That's what I was trying to explain with the break ride. And not just with that, just in general, too. Help thin out your deck, keep your triggers in your deck easy, because now they grappa and oranges only soul charge your non-trigger cards, so that's very handy. But of course it has a few faults, and I think that's kind of where it keeps the deck down, is it does struggle early on. Like, you can't do anything until you get Limit Break, and I think that's a little bit of Lucario Reverse's problem too, is you could do things before you get Limit Break, but you need kind of the right pieces to do so. I think Lucario has less of a problem there, and it's just missing a bit of support that it needs for Lucario. But for Minerva, she has to wait till she gets Limit Break. Once she gets Limit Break, her crits, everything, she can just pop off and destroy you. But yeah, Minerva struggles a little with before Limit Break. You side her to get stuff into the soul easy, but still, you're going to struggle. If your opponent decides to wait you out, you will probably lose all of your field and just be sitting there with, like, your PGs in hand. You might have to call your Minerva. So you can kind of be pushed out a little that way. Now, this deck is also came by surprise, too, a bit. Came out of nowhere, can I say. This is a mixed Dayusha deck. And Jesus, it's powerful. So basically, it's like your opponent's on, like, grade 1 or grade 2, and you go into I think they're usually on grade 2, and you go into Dayusha. You do the Go Yusha thing, go into Dayusha, and then you swing with the extra crit, and you're able to push your opponent to 4 damage early on. And if your opponent pushes you to Limit Break, you go to Great Dayusha. If they don't, you just keep swinging with extra crits, power it up, swing, and just pressure your opponent. Like, you bum rush hard with this deck. You bum rush with crits hard, and it's because you can. It's really disgusting, and actually deserves to be up here, because it kind of beats a lot out. It's, in a way, it feels a little bit like a replacement of Reiji after Reiji, you know, got its nerf. But, I mean, Reiji's still really, really good. It's just, wow, this deck is just, it just feels like that. So, they might end up nerfing it a little because of that, but we'll see. We'll see. And the last one up, the king of high tier, I'd say, is Gauntlet Buster Descended. So, I'm surprised I moved this down for the longest time. I was still considering it to be top tier. And even though it has everything, it just doesn't feel like it keeps up. It doesn't feel like the deck keeps up anymore with the top tiers. Like, the top tiers are just so much better, and they have so much more to them, that Gauntlet Buster Descendant just can't seem to keep up with those things. And it feels like everything's into, like, separate pieces too. Like, there's so many things in different pieces, and you need to get those pieces to kind of get it going well. Whereas, like, the top tier decks kind of just, they just kind of get, like, their main pieces, a couple other things, and they just kind of go with it. Or they have really easy ways of getting their pieces, and it's just really easy because of that. And Gauntlet Buster Descendant just feels like it's kind of fallen off a little. Like, it sucks too, because they're not going to really get any support until G as well, until, like, Stride. But I think they'll probably remain in high tier for a long time, but because they're still really strong. But fortunately, yeah, put it here. So top tier, let's look at the best decks in the game. We got Ashlei Reverse, Chaos Breaker, The End, Novell, Liberators and Revengers. So Liberators and Revengers, I will talk about that in a minute because those I kind of go back and forth with. But Ashlei Reverse is really gross. You get your Mirandas to search cards, search PGs, grade 2s, whatever you need. And you could swing with crits with Ashlei Reverse. You can retire rear guard front rows. You can pressure your opponent really hard because of that. And you get to Superior Call cards. So you can Superior Call something like a Miranda and make it easier to be able to nail your opponent. Really disgusting. Strong deck. It was popping off a lot at the beginning, but yeah, I definitely say it's at the bottom of top tier. It could end up being high tier next set, or probably the one after. Yeah, for now it's top tier again. And then we got Chaos Breaker, your Link Joker. Really strong deck. You have to play it differently than other decks, but it's a very strong deck. I mean, Chaos Breaker, like Link Joker, just stupid strong. Retiring, relocking, everything. Just a really gross deck. And, I mean, Link Joker's always been really gross, so... Yeah, it's just... This one is the superior one right now. Far superior. The End and Novel. So these are actually two different decks. The End is, you know, Dauntless. You break right at the end. And then later you go into Novel. Novel is basically just Dauntless, and you break right into Novel and stop your opponent from getting, you know, trigger effects, basically. So they're both really, really strong. I'd say Novel is just a tiny bit stronger because, like, that Persona Blast with being able to retire your entire opponent's field, oh my god. And then what he could do with, like, his skill with nullifying triggers and everything too is just disgusting. But I'd say they're about even. You could probably switch them back and forth. Like, I think in certain situations the End could be better, but I do think Novel is a teeny tiny bit better. And as for Liberators and Revengers, I think these two go back and forth for some people, because I think either Liberators or Revengers is the best deck in the game. I still think it's Revengers. I'm gonna clarify why. Liberators has so many things: superior calling, extra attacks, killing rear guards, damage on flipping, and you can't retire their rear guards. So it's extremely strong against a lot of decks that can retire, and not just that, it's just extremely strong in general because of being able to retire, and, you know, you can get extra attacks with Zenith. And easy get for Blaster Blade with, like, Zenith and Gancelot. And, like, the normal Gancelot, the Break Rate, of course. But Revengers, the thing is, it has all that, minus the unable, your opponent can retire your rear guards. But the thing is, you Superior Call and thin out the deck a lot more than Liberators do, because you do it a lot. And it's not just that. I think the key thing that makes Revengers just a smidge better is the Restanding Vanguard. You get a Restanding Vanguard, all you have to do is re-ride Raging Form. You're not dropping any cards. You kill 3 back rows, yeah, back rows, but you can still get your, like, PG, you can still keep your PGs in hand and everything. And I think that Restanding Vanguard beats out Zenith. You know, getting that extra attack by Superior Calling top card, and, you know, you might lose your grade 2. Might gain a grade 2, but it's RNG based. And I think that little bit of the Restanding Vanguard versus that makes Revengers beat it out just by the tiniest bit. It's like tiny, because they're both extremely strong. They're both an extremely strong deck, like, because you can go Garmor, and then now when they ride Raging Form, they only get the 2 Raging Form attacks because Blaster Dart can't retire anything, and then the next turn you go Zenith and get, like, swings. You could do shit like that, but of course you need your Zenith then, and you need your Garmor, and it's a bit RNG based, and I think because of that factor and because of the Restanding Vanguard too, it could still deny you the win because, oh no, I got PGs to hand because Restanding Vanguard, and extra attacks and extra draws, or even a heal that gets popped. So I think with that little bit, Revengers takes it a tiny bit in the RNG favor. But that is it. That is going to be the tier list. So that is my list. Let me know what you think is the best deck in the game and what you're hoping to get some support soon. Of course, as you heard, I'm excited for the Bermuda support, and I think Revengers is still the best. I think they could drop down soon, especially next set. We might see Liberators beat them out, but I don't know. It's a tight one. It's already a tight one here. It's going to be a tight one next set. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, let me know about that. Like, comment that, and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more, and I will catch you guys next time.